welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Nancy Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Well, hello, everybody. Today, I am talking to Taylor Cashdan. Now, Taylor is a North Carolina-based multidisciplinary creative and community builder that's passionate about people, design, and all of the intersections in between. He has a burning desire to collaborate with others and create exceptional work for people who actually give a shit. Now, that is something I can super get behind. Welcome, Taylor.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am really, really excited to have you on today. I'm really stoked to talk about a topic that is kind of like that giant pink elephant in the room all the time when we're talking about business and being an entrepreneur, digital leader, you name it, which is stress. More specifically, we're going to be so bold as to talk about stress addiction. So this is something I think about and talk about quite a bit. Super, super excited to talk to someone who has had a very, very involved relationship with kind of stress and coming back from it in a variety of ways. But I'll let him tell his own story. Taylor, before we get too deep into the stress stuff, can you maybe just share a little bit about who you are and what your passion is in life and in business?
Sure. Professionally, I'm a principal UX designer at Fidelity Investments. I work on their design systems team and standards teams. I also maintain a relatively healthy freelance roster outside of that, doing a lot of brand work. It's kind of the stuff that lights my fire. I like helping small businesses establish a visual identity that they can frame their audience persona and all that around. And that's what I really enjoy doing. Outside of work, I kind of do a lot of the same things, which is part of where this stress bubble began to burst in the first place. But I enjoy making, so little art projects here and there, collaborating with friends to make projects, little sub brands, things like that. But in the non-design realm, I have a puppy named Pax who is gnawing on a bone as we speak right next to me. And I like to ride my bike around town. I'm in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina, and there's a lot of cool coffee shops and things like that you can kind of ride to, park, hang out. It's a good place to be.
Awesome. I am also an avid cyclist. I live in a more rural area here, but cycling to coffee shops is something I still spend quite a bit of time doing. So you started hinting at this a little bit, but I'm curious, can you share a little bit with us about your personal relationship with stress, how it affects your life?
Yeah. So I self-identify as one of those people that used to use stress as a way to channel what I guess most people call a flow state. My whole idea was if I can figure out a way. So for as long as I can remember, I was a procrastinator. You talk about back in grade school, I never really learned how to study. So I was always the cramming type, right? So night before, 2 nights before, I would cram as much information as I can. And whenever I remembered the day of the test was whatever I answered correctly or incorrectly sometimes. Or if I was working on a paper, I was always that type that was I'm going to wait for that creative burst to happen, right before the deadline's due when the fire's, hottest, to be able to put pen to paper kind of thing. And that kind of an insidious path from the jump kind of infected my work path as well. And I just began down this pathway of using that as my creative juice to do all the things that was professional, whether it be waiting till, an inspiration struck from a deadline perspective, or trying to do as many things as possible to either feel like I was staying relevant or you make a boss happy or whatever. I never missed a deadline, well, not ever. That's a pretty resounding statement, but I never would intentionally miss things. But it was one of those things where I would use that stress, that procrastination, that pretend fire to fuel what I thought was doing my best work. And it turned out to be a pretty drastic way of living for me.
Yeah. This is all like painfully relatable to me. I definitely, especially during like younger years and younger days, that addiction to kind of procrastination, using stress as your juice, is has been really, really big for me and taken a lot of time to come out of. And I think that, a lot of our listeners are immersed in stress every day, whether it's, self-perpetuated or perpetuated by, different expectations. So I'm curious, in your own words, what exactly is a stress addiction as opposed to just experiencing stress or being in a state of stress?
Yeah, it's a good distinction, I think, to make, because I think there is the actual addiction portion, right? And I don't want anyone to think that I'm making light of addiction, because there are actual syndromes and things where, so cortisol is the stress hormone, right? It's the thing that's created by your adrenal glands that controls your fight or flight kind of response, helps you deal with stress and danger and that kind of stuff. And there's actual conditions where you have a deficiency or an overproduction of cortisol. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about that. When I say stress addiction, it's my pretend dependency on what I perceived as a need for stress. I was a gambler in how my body would respond to cortisol. So whether it be through overcommitment or just waiting for the last moment to begin something, I was banking on the fact that I would hit that fight or flight portion and all of a sudden get this like super creative channel, like open the floodgates, because, the cortisol would kick in. I'd have no choice. It'd be like, live or die kind of moment. And that's where that kind of funnels in. And I think a lot of it is at least for me, it was all self-imposed, whether it be from, like I said, overcommitment or just not giving myself the time I needed to really think through whatever I was working on. I would bank on this idea of like, no, I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. And the challenge when it comes to business or professional life in general, even personal life, is when you have that, when you're so used to doing that, right? And the outcome is often something positive, say productivity, right? Or a completed project. It's hard to look back at it and go, well, what I was doing worked, so why is it bad? Right? Which is just a dangerous trap to kind of find yourself in.
Oh my gosh, it's like you're on the inside of my head. I definitely get it. Things that you're describing, like overcommitment, procrastination, using stress as creative fuel. If I'm understanding you correctly, or at least this is how it manifests for me, in the end, one of the reasons why this can be so hard to shake and so pervasive is because at the end of accomplishing something, you look back and you say, oh, I got so much stuff done, or I made a difference in that person's life, or I, moved my business forward, or something like that. And the little puzzle piece that's actually a pretty big puzzle piece that you're missing was, at the low cost of something important for you, some part of your health or wellness or
sanity. I think you're right. I think there's another piece of that too, though, is even incrementally as you go, right? Because you start to see you kind of start to see the idea come to fruition, right? Or whatever you're making or writing or putting together or organizing kind of take hold. And once that starts to happen, you're like, oh, this is good. It's working. It's great. Whether that meant you have 2 hours left or 3 days left, when you have that, when the pieces start to align, right? Mm-hmm. It's validation that like, oh, this is fine. This is what worked, right? But like you said, at the end is when you reflect and go, yeah, but at what cost?
Yeah. Now, this is something that even, being aware of it, I think can be very, very pervasive. What are some of the things, like, why is it, do you think that, we as, leaders, workers, humans kind of believe that it's okay to sacrifice our own health or well-being to accomplish, a task or a goal, even one necessarily or many that aren't necessarily ultimately going to fulfill us or move our life forward, or even ones that will? Like, why is the cost of our wellness? Do you have any perspectives on why that's so unvaluable that was the wrong word, why it's so cheap to us, despite the fact that it has such a high cost?
Well, I mean, if you want to get political, it's capitalism, right? But I think ultimately the real thing is we're in a phase as a society, a generation, however you want to put it, of hustle culture being a positive thing. And I think it's just a perversion of the word hustle, right? When you think about where the term hustle originated and where it started to catch on, it was mostly in like urban city street slang. And the idea behind hustle was like you are hustling someone or taking advantage of a situation for your betterment, right? Now, oftentimes, depending on how the terminology was used, it could mean, literally hurting or doing harm in another person's kind of way to get that achievement. But I think as the word got used more broadly, it became so you're grinding hard, right? You're working extra, right? Where hustle became this, all of a sudden, this like other thing. And then it just took off from there to where that was the de facto phrase of people like, oh, how's work going? Oh, I'm hustling through, I'm grinding every day kind of thing. Instead of going, well, but what's making you do that? Like, what's making you grind through? Like, what's causing you to go that far, right? Or what have you set yourself up for in a certain way that's caused you to have to grind in that way? Now, given there's obviously many circumstances, that play into that, as socioeconomic status, actual job role, corporate hierarchy, all that wonderful stuff. But, there's a lot of that I saw a speaker say this once, and it's a shame because I don't remember who it was, or if it was from a TV show, I don't know. But they were like, for all those people that say they're hustling, there's a high percentage of them that aren't actually doing the hustling. They're the ones being hustled. And that hit home with me a little bit, because when I started to look, and I was like, well, that's kind of exactly what I'm talking about. It's like, we get to a point where we think we're doing all this good stuff, whether it's work or stuff for people or whatever. And we're like, no, we're just grinding ahead. We're making our headway. We're pushing, the limit, whatever it is. And then you realize, well, but at what cost, right? Is it your health? Is it your social life? Is it your family relationships? Like something has to give every time. There's no equaling out in that sense where there's not a give and a take. And I think I would argue that a majority of people that by default give that answer, I'm grinding, I'm hustling, are actually the ones being hustled, in that they're giving way more than they should, right? Or they compacted their schedule, their plan, their project, whatever, in a way that has caused them to give more than was necessary. And I don't mean give in the sense of like help people. I mean time. Right? The time you dedicate to something that, if you need to check email, right? And you're putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, and your email inbox explodes, that's your fault, right? Then you will have to sacrifice more time of your day to get through that email inbox, right? Whereas if instead you decided, every morning at whatever time for 1 hour, I'm going to clear my inbox, right? Incrementally. So you have a set amount of, a constraint basically to be able to really grind through that in a healthy, proper way that makes progress, as opposed to going, oh shit, it's Friday, I haven't answered an email since last Tuesday, now my whole day is shot. It's like, well, email didn't do that to you, you did that to you.
Okay. So I'm hearing two strong factors here that seem to create this like positive feedback loop that can be quite dangerous. One is this idea that, I've heard you describe in your blog as hustle hard, stay humble. And that being this kind of, perpetuation of the idea that to hustle, i.e. to just work harder, is important without necessarily, or perhaps is equated with success, without necessarily asking yourself the kind of pertinent questions that make the work that you're doing really effective or valuable or fulfilling. Basically what I'm hearing is that that's a myth, right? To hustle to succeed is a little that you have to hustle to succeed, and that hustling by nature is a definition of success is a myth. At the same time, it's something that we as individuals, it's tempting for us to feel like we're filling our lives with work and kind of stuff to do, while at the same time, we are just perpetuating this hustle and stress myth without necessarily, achieving the things that we want to achieve. Feel free to correct me if I'm a little off base there.
Yeah, no, you're close. I think the challenge here is that, you're not close. You're on the money. I think the challenge though is the term hustle. Like, I don't want it to come across as like, I'm saying people don't have to work hard. Like, you have to put in the time and you have to put in the work to get what you want. That's a given, right? No matter if you're talking about growing a company or building a shed, like it doesn't matter. You have to put in the time to do the thing. What I don't like is the glamorization of like, if you're not working harder than everyone else around you to the point of you're beating yourself to death, that's the way you succeed, because that's bullshit. There's study after study, which, by the way, any statistic that I mentioned, like I have links to, so I'm not making these up. I just don't know them off the top of my head. And like you could put them in the show notes. But there's study after study has shown that like there's a cap of like productivity hours per week before your body literally just is no longer productive, right? And that cap is between 40 and 55 hours a week. So those people that are putting in the 80 to 100, with the exception of like the savants, like the Elon Musks, that just have two brains in their head, there's only so much capacity that people can give in a way that's actually productive, right? You can sit and stare at something for a long time, or say you're working on something for a long time, but there comes a cliff to where you're making progress, and all of a sudden any more effort you put in without rest is just either minimal or negligible, to the point where you might actually be hurting whatever you're working on by not giving yourself that time to recover.
Okay, so I'm basically hearing that, for those of us who are aiming for, success goals, achieving our goals, productivity, et cetera, it's not that we don't have to work hard. It's that these kind of myths and traps that we fall into can cause us to believe kind of the wrong things will get us there. And I'm hearing, overcommitment, which is my particular poison. Like, hi, my name is Say. I'm an overcommitment addict specifically. Procrastination, you've talked about a whole bunch of kind of different ways here. But one of the things that is kind of sticking with me is the fact that our bodies actually aren't wired to go super hard, as you said, to go harder than everyone else all the time, that 40 to 55 hours. And I'm definitely someone who has put in more than 50 hours routinely. We think that we're doing the best we can be. We're being the best we can be and doing the best we can and moving ourselves towards success. But actually, we are just perpetuating unnecessary stress within our lives. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and then there's a tandem to that of like so stress is a large factor that's kind of immeasurable to a certain respect, but you've got a point of that where like the damage you're doing to your body along the way and your mental state is putting yourself at risk of just not being productive, if you want to put it in a work context, or hurting your mental and physical state, to be frank. And that's kind of what ended up happening to me. Like I ended up in the hospital because I was doing too much. I was at a point where we're going to fast forward a bit and then I'll rewind, but where the nurses had asked me like, well, what's an average day for you like, right? Because they were trying to measure my stress intake, I guess. And, I started rattling off stuff. I was like, well, I get up, I take the dog out before I go to work. I have some coffee. I go to work all day. Then I come home. I usually make dinner. I catch up on email, doing, whatever it is on my computer, maybe finish a project, go meet with a friend for dinner. Then I'll come back and I'll either watch a Netflix show or read a book or detox with a project. And they were like, no, like not in a week, in a day. And I was like, that's an average day. Like, I don't know how to answer that question any differently. And they just kind of stared at me. And that's when I realized, I was like, maybe this is a lot of things, right? And I didn't need to do all of this on a Tuesday, right? And so I think part of that, you can take the hustle hatred, so to speak, and kind of frame it in multiple ways, right? There's like the work setting of like, by working beyond your actual brain capacity, there's a cliff, like we were saying, where productivity drops off, right? Then there's like the outside factor of like doing things beyond your human capacity, right? Whether that means over committing yourself to things outside of work or beyond what's achievable in a day or a schedule that's manageable, it has other effects that you won't realize until something drastic happens, right? And that's kind of where my story picks up.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think a lot of us, as we're doing these stressful things, it's easy to pile up things until you don't realize just how bad it's gotten. And something kind of stops you in your tracks. Would you be willing to share with our listeners a little bit more in depth, kind of how you found yourself at that place of kind of intensity and what that was like for you?
Absolutely. So I was at a job that was very safe, in that it's the type of job you start there and you kind of don't leave. You'll continue to progress up. You'll work on some similar things. You'll hone your craft. You'll just kind of float through, but in a good way, right? Now, there's other factors as to why I ended up leaving that job, but point to mentioning that was I wasn't being creatively fulfilled, right? So I started searching for anything and everything outside of my day job to fill that up, right? Whether it be meetup groups, personal projects, side gigs, freelance work, professional orgs, whatever it was. I just needed that candle to be reignited, right? Because I wasn't getting that creative itch, that challenge from the workplace. I was doing stuff. I just wasn't feeling like I was enhancing what I was doing. It was leaps and bounds for the company because they hadn't had someone in my field as part of their staff before. So for them, it was like, heaven and earth difference. But for me, it was like, well, this is kind of remedial. I'm feeling myself start to templatize things. So I would seek out all these extra activities, which began a point of like, I was overexhausting my ability to do things, right? So like I would have my regular 8-hour workday, give or take, depending on the project at hand or the week. And then I'd come home and spend 2 or 3 hours working more or thinking through the next thing or with people, which is all well and great. But it compounded to a point where one day I woke up from a dead sleep and I was covered in sweat. Like I felt like I just got out of a pool. My head was pounding, my chest was pounding. I was dizzy, disoriented. And I was like, well, shit, I had a terrible dream. Like I need to take a shower, get ready for work. Like focus back in, Taylor, it'll be fine. So I kind of, got in the shower, cold water, kind of woke myself up. The dizziness faded a little bit, but this pitter patter thing in my chest kind of never left. And so I went to work and figured, that was weird. Woke up funny, I must have slept wrong, whatever. And I'm sitting there at my desk and I can feel like I'm both winded and fully energized at the same time, which is a really weird combination, right? Because, you've got all this energy, but you can't take a deep breath. And that pitter patter kind of never went away. And, I called in one of my coworkers and I was like, hey, this is gonna be weird, but like, I need you to put your hand on my chest and tell me if you're feeling what I'm feeling. Because, I've had muscle spasms before. They just feel twitchy. And like, even like a Charlie horse has that weird pain, that kind of thing. And I was like, weird to be having that in your chest. And especially at 24, but let's see what this is. So she puts her hand on my chest and she's like, oh, that doesn't feel right. And I was like, okay, so this is probably a time to act, right? So, I did some breathing exercises just to see if I can calm myself down. And when that didn't work, I just went right to my doctor, which happened to be around the corner at the time. So that was just pretty convenient. But I got there and he laid me down on the table and, did the little EKG thing, which is an electrocardiogram where they put up like nodes on your body to measure the electrical signals in your system to see if they can figure out, it's basically like a heart rate reader, but like on steroids. So it can really get a good baseline of all the things going on with your heart and how the blood's flowing through your body. And so he does that, and it's all over the place. And so he's trying to do these. There's a certain kind of muscle massage where you can try to impact the way the heart's beating. So he was trying to do that. He was trying to do some breathing exercises. None of that was working. So it was time that we had to escalate this to a hospital. So he didn't give me much detail as to what was going on because, number one, he didn't want to speculate. And two, I don't think we really knew what was happening until I got to the hospital. When I arrived there, I presume he gave them more information than he gave me, which was probably for the best. But when I got there, I walked in the hospital and they were like, here's a wheelchair, Mr. Cashdan. Like, let's go. We got to go to the back. And I was like, what do I need a wheelchair for? They were like, your heart's beating very, very fast. And if you pass out, we'd have to carry you to the back. And I was like, okay, fine. Like you can put me in the chair. I'm 5'9", 250. That's not easy to just lift up, So I get back there and they're hooking me up to all these monitors, all these people are around. I'm on like an oxygen tank. And I was like, what is happening? And they're like, well, you're sitting still on a bed and your heart is beating at 180 beats a minute. And to give some reference, average person's kind of resting heart rate is between like 60 and 70 beats a minute, depending on like how athletically fit you are. So, and even like at peak, like if you're working out and you're running hard, generally speaking, you stay between the 140s to 160s, depending on like how rigorous your workout is. So I was well beyond what was even safe for like a moderate workout. And I was sitting on a bed, right? So they were at the point where like, it was crazy. And mind you, this whole time, like all I'm feeling is like these little dancers on my chest, like it's just doing its thing. And it's not even in a rhythm. And that's the scary part. So long story short, I was basically diagnosed with a thing called atrial fibrillation. And what it is an electrical miscommunication in the heart. And usually it's caused by either excessive use of drugs or diabetes, severe overweight, or old age, like plus 60, to a point where like some of your, what do you call it? The veins that go to your heart and stuff can't pass blood as quickly. So like there's other problems like clotting and that kind of thing. So it's practically unheard of. Now, I'm not saying I'm like an anomaly, rare case, never happens, but it's very rare that it happens in younger people. And I was 24 at the time. So once like all those things were ruled out, family history, all that stuff, the only thing that was left on the bill of like possible causes was stress. And so that's when they started asking me all those questions. Like, well, what do you do, daily? Like, what's your normal life like? Like how, what's your job? What do you do for fun? Like all these things. And the list just never ended. And they were like, you need to take it easy, man. Like, this is not okay. And to give you some context, like I was in the hospital after, now mind you, to make it a little more real for the listeners, like, to get my heart back in order, like they tried doing an IV where they put like a needle in your arm and put some medicine. And my heart was like, nope, no, we don't care about this medication. We're not going to stop. So they were like, all right, well, the only other option is to put you under, so like knock me out and shock my body back into rhythm. So think those like clear, like that thing. And so they had to strap me into this machine basically. And like all of them stood back and they pressed a button and it like electrocuted my body. And they do that 3 times in increasing strength and my heart still didn't respond. Normally that's the thing they use to like restart a heart to bring it back, right? So to think that like my heart was doing its own thing, was shocked so that it would hopefully get back into normal rhythm 3 times and it still didn't work is like pretty scary. So when I was upstairs in the room, like my heart was starting to go slower to a certain extent. And it's probably because I was relaxing and being forced not to do anything, but it eventually got into its own rhythm. But I was on like constant monitors. I was there for 3 days. They were doing like sonograms, the same they do for babies, like when women are pregnant. Same thing on my heart to make sure there was no like extrusions or chambers that weren't working. Like it was crazy. And, it was to the point where like I felt guilty leaving work to the point where I was like, I need to email my boss to let her know I'm at the hospital and won't be in tomorrow. And the nurse was like, give me your computer. Like, no. Like, this is why you're here, And I was like, okay, now I get it. And that was it. That was the turning point, the moment of like, I was like, I need to change. This is not safe. And it's been an uphill battle ever since.
Yeah, because that's a really powerful story, and some of the things that really jumped out for me in there, other than that I can really relate to that idea of just list what you do for the day, and you're listing and listing and listing and listing, and they're like, is this one day? Is this 1 week? Like, holy cow! Is that you mentioned it's not all work. Like I think for some of us and for many of us, that thing that we put in, 10, 12 plus hours a day on that can, generate a lot of stress in our lives is work. But I have 100% found that since I have kind of, perhaps not in such an extreme way, but really realized how much stress was negatively impacting my life and my health, and really tried to reduce my commitments, the amount of stuff that I do, I still find I've been doing this for years and I still find my hours creeping up until I run into burnout. I'm slightly ashamed to admit that I burned out 4 or 5 times this year, or I guess last year now, 2019, while working for the most part 30 hours or less a week at a job that I love.
So passion too, right? Because that's the kicker. Is like, this isn't like you're not miserable the whole time, right? You're doing things cool, whether it's like the work or the work outside of work or the fun project that's not supposed to be stressful at all, right? But your brain doesn't delineate between what these things are, right? If it's working, it's potentially stressed, right? Your subconscious is like, nope, this is just something I have to do. I have to process this. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. There's something going on and I have to exert energy to accomplish whatever it is we're trying to accomplish. Whether you emotionally feel happy, sad, miserable, thrilled while doing the thing is irrelevant to a certain extent, because the way, the deep mind is processing it is like, okay, it's still something I have to concentrate on. I have to exert energy from a tank that's already empty, right? Yeah. And you learn very quickly that like you can't pour from an empty cup. And when you're a giver, right, it's nearly impossible to not want to pour, to help friends, to help family, to help clients, whatever it is. When you're like, I guess I could spend that extra hour, or I'll sneak that phone call in over my lunch break, right? Or like, I'll do that on my way home from work instead of just taking
Yeah.
that time to breathe.
Yeah, yeah. See, to me, that right there, what you described, that, like, oh, yeah, cool, I'll take that on. Oh, yeah, sure, I'll fit it in here. Even sometimes when you can kind of feel the pressure mounting, and on some level, that that's not going to be, fun or sometimes even okay for you, but like for me, that's what really resonates with addiction. That's like when that it's not necessarily serving you on some level, but you're still just kind of find yourself unable to say no. But you can't go to a 12-step program or something for addiction. So, you mentioned that was a big turning point for you, but it's been an uphill battle. When you're so far down the rabbit hole, how do you dig yourself out? How have you dug yourself out?
I guess you could argue I was literally shocked out of that hole. But I mean, I didn't really have a choice, and I think that's the hard part. Like, if I didn't have this heart thing, the AFib incident, I probably wouldn't have changed. I probably would have been like, all right, I'll just take it easy today, right? And just kept moving. And even like now, like this, when I put this story into like a cohesive thing, because a lot of folks like first will ask me like, well, why'd you leave your job, or why were you in a hospital for X amount of time, or why are you reeling back on your commitments? And basically I started to explain this whole thing, and it built up to what became the talk and these podcasts and all this stuff. And I only started sharing the story more publicly like March of last year. And to think since then, and I don't want this to come across as like braggadocious or facetious in any way. I'm trying to show the addiction here, but like, I've spoken at 6 conferences. This is my 9th podcast on top of my changing full-time jobs, having freelance clients, and launching a brand with a friend of mine in Canada. So international time difference. And part of it is like, I had to look at it and go, well, all I'm doing is getting back into this pattern, right? Of like doing all this shit when I was trying to not do it. And the story I was telling and the tips I was writing for myself was so that I wouldn't be doing this stuff. And yet I find myself back in, the trenches, so to speak. Yeah, of like wanting to do more, either because, I'm feeling good right now, I can totally do that extra thing. Yep. Or I'm doing this other piece. So like my goal for 2020 is like, unless some kind of like, bucket list project comes out of the wind, like I'm really going to try to not do any freelance work, because it also means freelance work. Like I'm sitting in my room or my office or wherever I'm working by myself, honed in on a computer. So I'm not getting, physical interaction with people. I'm not being social. I may be making cool work, but I'm then having to fulfill my need to be around people in other ways, right? So instead, what I'm trying to do is pivot that. If I want to work on something, it's got to be a collaborative project, right? Where I've got to find other people to work on it with, so that I'm forced to not only deal with another schedule. That doesn't mean I can work every night till 4 a.m. on it, but I'm also not by myself. So the responsibility is split, but also I'm there spending time with another human instead of staring at a screen. Because I'm the type that recharges by being around people, so that's why like conferences and stuff are like my bread and butter. But when you're, I realized that to get where I am from a career perspective, like, to be clear, I wouldn't change anything, because I probably would be in a worse pattern if I hadn't had all this happen. But to get where I was, like through college, like my junior and senior year, like I worked full time. I also had clients on the outside, and that meant giving up a lot of like the social stuff. My only regret from college was like that I didn't travel abroad to do like a study abroad thing. And number one was it was financially not possible for me, but 2, like it was a thing I never took the time to do, because I was always like, I have this internship that I need to do, or I have this other thing, or how could I leave in the middle of client work, that I'm trying to keep up for myself to get ahead for later. And what's interesting is that's why part of my spiel is I've always, or at least for a few years, I kind of shat on Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V. And part of that was because he used to preach this like, quit your job, start your company, hustle, hustle, hustle mentality, right? And while that was some of the message, part of it was my fault for not really listening. And what I mean by that is a lot of the social media snippets and the Instagram images and shit were always catered around that. But if you actually listen to the content and read his content and actually go beyond the surface level, you see that he talks about how miserable he was in his like 20s and 30s, because all he did was work every day, or he selectively and intentionally did not have a social life so that he could get his family out of the rut that they were in and blah, 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 blah. And his, when you start digging into the stuff that he writes, not the stuff people write about him, he always prefaces with like, I don't recommend this, but you're asking me how I did it and I can't lie to you. Right. So he'll give the information. And around, I think it was late 2017, early 2018, he shifted his whole mantra to like the gratitude thing, which I think has been a good turn because now people are understanding that like, it's probably better to help each other than do it on your own. But the point of that was, I was leaning in to that mentality, whether I thought about it or not. I was like, I want to be financially independent. I was paying for some of my own school stuff. Like I had scholarships, thankfully, and a grandmother who helped me with room and board. But like it was, and I never had to ask for anything as a kid. Like I don't want to make it seem like, there's plenty of people who had it harder than I did. But I also knew a lot of those folks, and I knew I never wanted to have to experience that, right? And I went to a very wealthy high school. Like I rode the bus till I was a senior, and like I went to a high school where kids in freshman year like rode up in Land Rovers. Like at 16, 17, just got their license. Like it was excessive. And so I always had this, I guess, thing looming around of like, I could have that, but I'm not in that position. And I don't think it was never like aspiring to have, all the material things, but it was more just like, I used to say like, I'll know I've made it when I can go to a restaurant and not have to look at the prices on the menu before ordering the food that I want to eat, kind of thing. And like, that was the goal. I was like, by the time I get out of school, like I don't want to be that guy that like, oh, I wasted my whole, college career partying and fucking around. Now, given I did my share for partying and fucking around, let's be honest. I was not an angel, but I made sure that, all my bills are paid. I had money if I needed something. Like I bought my own car. Like I did all the things that I thought were the right things. But the trade-off for me was like, all right, well, I'm going to give up some of these social things. Like I'm not going to go to this party that night because I want to finish this project for a client or whatever. Or, I'm going to choose to be at the apartment that's not as expensive, but is farther from my friends so that I can focus and save money or whatever. And so I was always in that mindset of like, hoard cash, work on the things you like so you can do more stuff later. And what you start to realize is that pattern can become very dangerous very quickly in a sense that you isolate yourself. Like there comes a time
later
where
never comes.
Yeah, exactly. And you start to realize like, well, why are my friends calling? And it's like, well, fuck them. They don't want to hang out. And it's like, oh no, Taylor, it's because every time they've called you, you've told them no, right? Or you're like, no, I got to finish this project. So how many times are they going to hear no from you before they just stop calling? Like you're not giving them anything either. So why bother, right? And that social change was like a shell shock on top of all this AFib stuff. And I started to realize I was like, I was angry at the people around me, because of that. I was like, why am I being left out? Like when I always include them kind of thing. So you talk about, you've got the work piece, right? All the stresses of the job, the normal job, the potential toxicity of the workplace, et cetera. You've got the overcommitment of just things that you want to do because they seem like fun or they seem like the right things to do or they're cool or you're just excited about a project. Then you've got the social piece of all the things that you want to be around with people to experience other people's lives and be part of them and, have experiences with them and romance and all that sort of stuff. And then the overarching thing of like, well, what's healthy as a human being? And when you look at all of that together, like I was just trading one to have another and like tripling down on them at a certain time. Like I was, it's like the guy who like drinks a cup of coffee, shoots a Red Bull, and then does a line of cocaine just to get up for work in the morning. When it's like, dude, you could have just slept an extra hour. What are you doing?
Yeah. At that point, you're adding a lot of Band-Aids without actually healing.
For no reason.
Yeah. So where did so what are some of the things, that other people maybe, if they want to turn themselves around before they get to the point of landing in the hospital? And, I will say that, it happened to you early on. It happened to my stepmother actually just before Christmas as well. She ended up in the hospital with a stress-induced heart attack. But let's say, some of us want to turn things around and make different choices earlier on. You've talked a little bit about a simple process that we can maybe use to start shifting these patterns. Can you walk us through some of those steps?
Yeah, sure. So I think part of it is watching what you consume. And what I mean by that, so I made a cocaine joke a minute ago, and by the way, I'm not advocating for any kind of drugs. Let's be clear. But not that I've ever wanted, but I couldn't do them anyway because I have a heart condition. But the point is, part of that was caffeine for me. I was the type that would just smash a Red Bull at midnight to keep going when I could have just taken a nap. Right. Mm-hmm. So pushing your body beyond the limit of what it's capable of or what it should be capable of is not healthy consistently. I'm not saying don't pull an all-nighter to finish something, but like my caffeine intake was through the roof because I started to get like a tolerance on coffee. Right. So part of it's like watching what you're allowing your body to consume. And that is not only food, that's all the things around you, like the information, the articles, the social media content, the stuff that's impacting the way you make your decisions. And that's often the hardest thing because like you're seeing all this stuff out and you're absorbing whether you're consciously doing it or not, right? But it's important to reel back and go, okay, but what's going to work for me, right? So being super specific on what you want about that. And then honing back. Like if it means, all right, don't have coffee past 9 o'clock because you won't be able to sleep, don't do that, right? Or if you realize as you're scrolling through Instagram, it's just making you depressed, stop looking at Instagram for certain periods of time or unfollow the people that are making you feel that way, right? So part of that is curation of your experience as a human, right? But I think more specifically, if you're talking about with the workload portion, it's just you have to kind of introspectively decide on a few things. For me, number one, it was like figuring out if what I'm doing is really what I need to be doing, right? Whether that means taking on a project, working on a specific task, committing to an event, whatever it was, looking at all these things and going, all right, no matter who's telling me these are the things I need to do, whether it's myself or external factors, are they the right things, right? Do they need to be here? And then trimming the fat on what, is beyond what's reasonable. And the what's reasonable is going to be different for everybody. And that's just a fact, right? And that's the hard thing of like, I can't prescribe something to someone to be like, don't do more than 4 projects a month. Like, I don't know what you're capable of. I don't know what your threshold is. I don't know what's healthy for you. I don't know what you're doing now. But there's a piece of like you said, you burned out a few times this year. I think data is a powerful thing. And if you're able to look back at like, all right, you worked on 36 projects this year, maybe you do 20, right? Or you strive to do 20, right? And anything after is bonus, but you don't actively aim for that many, right? And maybe that means adjusting some things from a business perspective to make that work monetarily, right? So it's watching all of your intentional things that you're working on impact the rest of the stuff, right? So like, let's go really, really tangible. If you're taking on work at a day job even, and you know that a task will take you 1 hour to execute, but it's going to take about an hour to kind of get into the right mindset and pull your inspiration and pull out sources, buffer it, right? Try to give yourself an additional hour, like get that 3-hour time frame to make sure you're doing the work right. And you're giving yourself time to take a break and breathe and go to the bathroom and have a coffee break and, get a coworker's perspective on the work as you're doing it to make sure you're doing it right. It's planning ahead, right? That's kind of pillar number one. And that goes with, like I said, all things related to your personal intake of food and beverage, of the content you consume, of the things you read, and then being also intentional about the work that you do and how you do it. That's kind of leg one. I think leg two is then applying a similar filter to the things you do outside of your job responsibilities, right? When you get home and you're beat, right? Is it better to plow through and start that other thing you wanted to start? Or can you push it to tomorrow? Is that okay? Right? Or if you have a tough week coming up, don't commit to some kind of social gathering every evening. Like give yourself a day or two of buffer time to just recoup, whether you like being alone or not, to just detox and get your head straight. It's being intentional with your time. And then ultimately, like I think the kicker to all of that is you really do have to, I'm circling back to my first point, but you really have to like look introspectively because this is going to be different for every person, every business, every leader, every circumstance. Like all the things that go into the way you make your decisions is going to be so personal, right? And you have to know your limits both on the low end and the high end. Like if you realize like one project a month is the most boring thing you could possibly, and I use project loosely. Project could be like house project, work project, could be going to a concert, like one thing. I'm just going to use the word project. If you're doing one thing per month and realizing you're just like literally clawing your eyes out of boredom, or you feel yourself being restless, you can add to that. Like, this isn't a formula that you can't work up to and adjust, right? Because like we're only here on Earth for like one life, and there's no reason to like run and gun until you can't breathe anymore, because then you don't get to enjoy all the time you put in. And more importantly, you don't get to have the people around you like that you need to have there to be able to enjoy those things. Like, it pushes everybody away. And then you're left with like, what, a couple completed projects and a heart condition, like what's the goal here?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing for me too, is that like shell shock of like, but what are you doing this for? Like, what do all of these things add up to? And that just circles back to my first point of like, when you're pruning your tasks, like, why am I going to this event, right? Why am I showing face at this networking group when I know I don't enjoy going? Like, what's telling me I need to go there? And then was it the social need? Is it other people in my life? Like, what is it? Identifying that will be immensely helpful in trying to understand what you need to do as a person to feel fulfilled.
I think that's really, really powerful. And there's a lot to unpack there. Just to kind of recap some of the highlights that really resonated for me.
Sorry, I got the wall.
No, that's okay. I'm here to just corral things and reflect them back at people. So the thing that really struck out, actually, these are some of the last things you said, but I think that they are some of the most resonant, the deepest for me, is looking introspectively at what matters to you and asking yourself why you've committed to a certain thing. I would go so far as to say, for myself, who is definitely someone who, I have more time off from work. Let's help everyone around me with different projects and take on a million projects. I often ask myself, why me? Not like, why me? Why is my life like this? But like, why is it me who has to do this thing? Is it me who has to do this thing? Why am I doing this thing at all? And that combination of looking introspectively and asking yourself why and not being afraid to do it often, I think creates kind of like a guiding star, if I'm hearing you correctly, that helps you understand as you're going through the actual process of reducing your commitments and rearranging your life, et cetera, to make sure that what you're doing is actually aligned with who you desire to be and what you desire your life to look like. Now, if we get into some of the more specific ways to kind of shift that stress mindset to one of more kind of mindfulness and presence, if I'm hearing you correctly, being control what you consume. Oh my gosh, yes. Whether that is, media, food, drugs, people, just understanding what it is that you're consuming, how it's affecting you, and shifting that to support all of these things we've talked about, the why and the introspective work that you're doing. I'm also hearing being intentional about the work that you do and the work that you take on, whether that is work in the, official business sense or simply like projects, at home. And something that's a bit more tactical, but I really like, is set yourself, if you're blocking out your time, set yourself more time than you need, which causes you to then say no to more things. I really like that because I know it's so tempting to be like, okay, I have 3 hours. What is the maximum amount of stuff I can get done in those 3 hours? Okay, I have time. Like, I do this all the time in my head. I'm like mentally planning out my week when someone asks me something, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've got 20 minutes there. I could totally fit that in those 20 minutes. But I'm hearing that by blocking yourself just literally more time than you need, you can, set aside time for the most important things that contribute to your why. And then a few other things, setting yourself detox time, just in general, cultivating a mindset of being intentional about what you're choosing to fill your time with. Giving yourself buffer time between tasks, deferring things to later or the next day. And I would even go so far as to add that this is something that, if you're doing it, as you said, Taylor, to, have more time with the people in your life and enjoy your life more while you're here, you can always ask those people to be accountability partners in this as well. I know the men in my life are constantly telling me to just kind of sit down. Do you really need to do that? Like, not in kind of a nagging, crappy way, but in a way of just kind of reflexively reminding me that I'm I am, establishing wellness and mindfulness and existing in the moment as more of my life priorities. Gratitude, another one that you mentioned. Also, I mention these words because I think that for me, it's been really important to replace stress with something else. I don't know whether that's like a cop out, but otherwise it's like, I find myself pacing, like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do?
I think it speaks to the idea of like, control what you can, right? And then
Yeah.
when you start to get control over those things, you can then try to impact the things you weren't able to control before. Like, I don't want people to misunderstand. Like, I was in a workplace where like I was the only designer, right? So anything that came down the pipe that was needed to be made, it was my job. Like, and it didn't matter who it came from. It would always end up on my desk. And I didn't give myself the space or set a precedent in that I could say, okay, cool, I can do that, but it'll be next week, right? And it's hard to break a pattern once you've already kind of enforced it yourself, especially when people start to depend on you for that kind of timeline. But I'll say this too, when I moved jobs a few times over the last few years, when I got to the next job, I felt myself like itching for things to do, right? Because I was so used to being the only person. I had to run and gun all the time, and it led to all this bad habit. Now, given some of that's on the employer for like, hey, bosses, you should recognize when your employees are very clearly overworked or stressed out. But some of that's also on me for not speaking up, right? But when I got to a position where I then had a team, right? And I was like, a perfect example, I worked at an advertising technology company, and my manager at the time was like, when I got there, she was like, all right, great. Like, I want you to sponge for the first 2 weeks that you're here. Just learn the products, learn the team, like be with people, learn the company, like, and then we'll start, rolling you into assigning you tasks. And I was like, dope. This sounds like, a great way to learn the company. By like day 4, I was like itching. I was like, I haven't actually made anything. Like, I feel like I'm just stealing their money. Like I'm just absorbing for nothing. I haven't made stuff.
I think
Right.
I don't interrupt you. I think that's powerful. I felt like I was just stealing their money.
Yeah, it's toxic, and it was hard because the first company, was about 400 people big. This next one was a couple thousand, and so there's more dispersed work over groups of people, right? So dispersed work means it doesn't all land on one person's plate, right? So that teams can pick up the slack for each other the way it should work. And that perpetuating to-do list that I was so used to just isn't a thing because you've got systems in place. There's managers beneath managers to help you figure out how to get the work done. And also then to advocate for you to the people that are asking, going, no, my team's time is booked. You have to come back later, kind of thing. And I hadn't had that support structure before because we were kind of a marketing department that kind of ran on our own at the first place. So when I got to that next job, it was like I was itching because I felt like I was stealing, like I said. It was just like, I don't know what to do. And then what the funky part is I found myself in this pattern of like, all right, I need to go help somebody, right? So I started helping out my coworkers in doing some stuff. And then we got stuff done quickly, right? Because there was 2 of us working on it, 3 of us working on it. And then we set this precedent unintentionally that we can get all this stuff done quick, right? And I watched it happen in front of my eyes again of like, I just poisoned the well. Like I watched myself do it, right? And then when I got to the next job after that, kind of a similar thing happened. This company's got tens of thousands of employees all over the world. It's Fidelity, where I'm at now. And, my manager was like, absorb, go and learn the different teams, do the same thing. And I was like, I'm not going to fuck this up again. Like I'm going to take this time and like really learn the people around me. I'll help out if the task comes up, but I'm not going to actively seek out work in a way that I did the last time. Because not only did it like screw over the team, but it put me in the same position I was before. Now, mind you, that was not anyone's fault but my own, right? They had no idea what my capacity was, and I didn't show any break in my stride because I wanted to impress them while I was there. So they couldn't have adapted in any other way than they did. So there's nothing on them. But I was just trying to make sure that when I got to this next thing that I didn't like sabotage my own path again, right? I had to get out of my own way. And so when I was there, when I first started, I realized that I was moving faster than some of my peers. And part of that, like I started looking, I was like, okay, there's no way, like sometimes it's skills based, right? That you may know something a little bit better than others, but there was no way that it was that quick. And I was like, I'm missing something. I have to be missing something. And then I realized like they're giving themselves time to understand the problem, make sure it's the right solution. It's not the burn and churn that's so prevalent in the marketing space where like you don't have an option to iterate later. Like when you print that booth backdrop, like it's printed, it's out. That's it. There's no chance to like look at it and reprint it. That's not how it works. In product design, like you can produce an MVP, you can produce some features and then enhance them later. as long as you're, meeting your requirements. And you can iterate and fix and re-release and whatever to a point where it's almost seamless. I mean, it takes effort, of course, but it's not in the same way to like once the physical thing is built, it can't be disassembled, right? So I was so used to this burn and churn atmosphere that switching into a different world of design was like a shell shock for me. And I had to like tell myself like, hey, slow the fuck down, because not only are you going to screw your team over, but two, have you reaffirmed that this is the right thing to be doing right now, the right solution for this? Have you really tried to be intentional with the work that you're doing here? The solution you're suggesting is the right one, as opposed to just, we have a Thursday deadline, we're just going to try this, we're going to go with it. Switching from that mindset to something that's more intentional was like a game changer. And I've made more and better work in the last year than I have in a long time, because I've just been able to go, well, maybe I should revisit that, or maybe I should sit back, and that's very much the workplace context. I want to also speak to like the agency side and the freelancers. Like I got to a point where I had to freelance. Yeah. I've always had this like, dream or whatever of like owning my own agency kind of thing and doing my own thing full time, as opposed to just an addendum to my normal workload. And then I kind of got forced into it after a layoff. And then I realized very quickly that as much as I enjoyed it, I hated having to chase the work and having to do the selling and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And have to take projects I really didn't want to do, but I needed to pay bills, and I hated that. So I went back into the fold, or finding an employer, so to speak, to have a little bit of a net for myself. But what I also realized is that habit worked the same way, right? When you start to be more intentional with the work you bid on or you pitch, you can find ways to make up for quote unquote revenue lost, right? If you were normally going to just take 5 projects, 3 of them great, 2 of them shitty to pay the bills, try increasing your rates. Like there's a pretty good chance you're already undercharging, because 80% of us do, right?
Yep.
Try to increase your rates, make up for that gap different. You're adding way more value. And here's the kicker, right? If you took on 2, okay, let's just play a numbers game, right? If you were taking on, and these are going to be completely inflated for sake of the example. If you were taking on 5 projects at 10 grand a piece, right? And that's what was making your company's revenue for the month, right? But 2 of them were shitty projects. 3 of them you knew you were underbid, but you bid them already, and whatever, it is what it is. So $50K is what you're getting out of this, right? To do those 5 projects in a month. There's a significant chance that if you instead took on 2 projects at $25K a piece to make that same number, you would do far better work on those 2 for multiple reasons. Number one, you will guaranteed self-impose on yourself. They're paying more, they deserve more. It's a guaranteed byproduct of this creative marketing agency style realm. It's just the way it is. The second piece of that is, hey, guess what? You now have 3 projects worth of time to spend across these 2 projects that you booked on top of the time you've already booked for them. So you can really be diligent on, this is the right solution for this client. I can really investigate their needs. I can dig deeper into the subject matter that I may not be as fluent in to give them a better solution. So you're providing umpteen more value for the appropriate rate that you build, right? So you've got these 2 projects that you're blowing out of the water because you're doing so well with them, because you had the time to dedicate and also some time to rest, so that you can then focus more on the work at hand, as opposed to getting stacked out, making the same amount of money, if you want to talk in monetary figures, the same amount of money for arguably subpar work, because either you didn't feel you were worth the money you're asking for, or you thought this was the way it has to happen. A mentor once told me, when I was asking questions about, like, I was working on a book cover, and I wanted to charge like $200. And he was like, what are you asking for advice on, so I know how to respond to you? I was like, well, number one, I don't know if the price is right. Like, I've never done a book cover before. That's number one. And number two, like, what about the licensing and all that other jazz? And he was like, well, number one, what would you bill for a brand project? I was like, this. And he was like, well, why the hell is your other number thousands lower? Like, I don't understand. And I was like, well, it's a different kind of work. I don't have the confidence in it. I don't know what it's going to turn out to be. And he was like, okay, well, first of all, throw that shit out the window, because all your experience you've done here is transferable. It's still a creative project. But if you're going to feel guilty and you're going to beat yourself about it, like, charge half, right, of what you would normally do, instead of that minuscule, basically hour and a half of build hour that you were going to charge for that potentially week-long project. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, it makes me feel so weird. I've never done this before. And then he just started he pulled up my work and we're just digging through. He's like, okay, cool. See that element there? That's part of a book cover. You can do this type formatting on here and da-da-da-da. And it made me think for a minute. I was like, oh, okay. So all this other stuff that I've done is actually value added, and I can do this. I can charge this. And then you just throw the number out to the client, right? Here's the rate. Thank you. Let me know if you want to continue. And sometimes, 8 out of 10 times that I've done this, they've been like, cool, thanks. Let us know where to send the check. It's never been like, whoa, that's too high.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just the reality of the business. Shoot for the fucking moon. The worst thing is you renegotiate down,
Yep. And better to renegotiate down from a higher number. Something being very immersed in client work for many years now that is a very, very prevalent in our experience and in the experience of our partners is also that when it's kind of this almost reverse correlation where people are paying you less for something, often they demand far more, especially if they're paying you less because they can't really afford more. Now, don't get me wrong, right? I, like all of us, have to, gauge what to spend my money on. But for whatever reason, it can be much, much, much more difficult to work with someone who, they're spending the $200, but, they're like, oh, could you do this little extra thing? Could you do this little extra thing? Because it's so precious. And maybe not at the 200 mark, but, let's say you're building a website for 2,000 or something like that. If that 2,000 is very, very dear to those people, then you might find yourself, okay, I'll just do a little bit here. I have empathy for them, or I have sympathy for them, or, they are paying me and it's easy for that scope creep to really get out of control or to breed resentment.
Talk yourself into it. Talk yourself into it. And I want to circle back on that for a second. $2,000 for a website, that's really low.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Right. It was an example. I know it was an example, but that's the funny part is we'll tell ourselves that and be like, oh, that's fine. It's a mom and pop. And now I don't want this to be misheard. I'm not saying first of all, different prices for different companies. Do it. Small businesses should not pay tens of thousands for the same thing a Google will pay, right? Never. However, your time has value and it has worth, right? And it should be applicable to the amount of time you're putting in. And if you are a, senior 12-year level person, right, doing a project for a nonprofit, sure. Could you donate your time? Absolutely. But there's a certain portion, maybe nonprofit's a bad example because I'm big on doing stuff for nonprofits, but there's a certain caveat there of there's a risk you're playing by lowering your rate or your hours or whatever that actually hurts the industry more than you're giving benefit to the people that you're doing the work for, because then they only value it at the point you've put it at. So the best advice on that perspective I ever got was 2 things. Number 1, always offer a payment plan. You can't pay $2,000 for your brand project right now. Great. Pay it over the year, but you're going to pay my rate, right? Because then it's all right, a small business can plan out 6 months, 8 months of payments. It may not be what they wanted to spend, but if you're delivering the value that you're saying you are, it's worth it, right? That's number 1. Number 2, whenever you're going to give a discount like that, let's say we're going to talk about that $2,000 website. If that site's worth $15,000, you invoice them for $15,000 and then add a discount.
Yes.
Right? To show them what that shit's worth.
Yeah.
And when they go the next time, they'll know what they're getting themselves into. Because if you don't, they're going to go to that next place, go, well, that last guy only charged me $2,000. Why don't you do it for that? And all it does is start this terrible discussion where people aren't valuing the work that's being done.
Yeah. I really, really love, Taylor, here how you've just made it really clear and shown us that even though we can get stuck in our head and think that, maybe we're the only one who's suffering, or, okay, I'll let it slide this time, etc., or that it's not such a big deal. The reality is that making these choices to sacrifice our own kind of well-being in exchange for getting something done, this does have an impact. It has an impact on the quality of your work. It has an impact on the industry. It has an impact all over the place. And once again, it's a myth to think that, it's only you who's suffering, so therefore it's easy to sweep it under the rug. I mean, I'd like to say that we don't need it to be any more than that, right? As humans, our worth, our health is worthwhile and is valuable. But if you're finding yourself kind of stumbling over that, I think that perspective, to be reminded that, yes, this affects other people too, and not in a good way. Maybe you're not doing them any favors.
You're
Again,
not doing
there's
yourself any favors
exclusions, but
either. Yeah, absolutely. And you're also not doing yourself favors either. I mean, to be completely transparent, oftentimes the part I struggle most with during projects is the fucking contract. Like I sit on that thing. Is this right? Is this price right? Did I include the right deliverables? Am I cheating them out of stuff? Can they go somewhere else for cheaper? Am I the right person to do this project? Like the stress is not the making, which is what a lot of people stress out about, right? Of the doing. I love the doing. I will always love the doing. I like the problem solving, the challenge, all that stuff. But I sit on that contract and the details of the contract. And I have a template. Like it's not even like I'm changing much, you know? But when I'm running through like the nitty gritty details of the deal and like talking to my partners about it when we're working on projects together, it's always like this give and pull of like, are we doing this right? Should it be more? Should it be less? Is this the right amount of things? Are we estimating the right amount of time? It's that pre-planning that's the job outside of the job. Like money aside, all the planning of like, all right, well, we need to buffer these, review timelines the right way. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck and slammed if we overbook with one project on this one, and then we get 2 reviews in a week, and all of a sudden we have all this work that has to be done in 3 days instead of if we staggered the schedules, or whatever. And it's all that pre-planning that happens before the work even starts. That for me is often the stuff that's like the most stressful. And I've had to lean into like trusting, my partners, number one, when we're working together, to be like, all right, I need you to be real with me. Like, what is your bandwidth so that we can get this down on paper correctly? Or being real with myself and going, Taylor, you'll be out of town next week. Why did you book a project that's due the day after you get back?
Yeah.
Like, you're an idiot. Like, why would you do that? And I've done that a lot because I'm like, oh, they'll take time to review while I'm out of town. And it's like always, I'm checking email when I'm out of town when I said I wouldn't be doing that. Or I'll get home and there's a revision that they asked for or a deliverable that I pushed off. I was like, I'll just get it done when I get back on top of whatever edits. And you end up pigeonholing yourself by just planning badly. And I say all this as not a critique to other people. This is shit that I've done and still do and literally recognize daily of like, damn it, why did I do that? Like I'm working on this new kind of like mastermind collective kind of concept that I'm trying to work through that I don't want to reveal too much detail yet because it's not official. But my point is that like I've been stirring on sending this email description to a few people that I'm asking for feedback. And I've been like sitting on this thing for like a week and a half. And it's like, Taylor, just fucking send it. Because number one, they're going to respond either way. You ask them for help and they're your friends and they're going to do that. But number two, the amount of time you've wasted stirring on it, that you've then delayed all the other work you wanted to get done. Like when I was pretty much taking a few days here and there between the new year or the weekends in between from the holidays, like I started this art project that's now sitting and taking up this huge space in my office. I don't know if you saw when we were on video a few minutes ago, the big black board behind me.
Yeah.
Process of building, it was meant to be a burnout project. Like I was feeling, low. I needed to do some art. I don't often do art for myself. So I was like, all right, if I dedicate every weekend of December to working on this project, at least a Saturday or Sunday, I'll be able to get it done. And then like social stuff came up and I delayed it and whatever. And there's no deadline to this because it's not holding anybody accountable. And that's part of my problem too, is like, if I don't set a deadline, it doesn't get done. But also like art shouldn't have deadlines unless it's for clients, right? So I'm like trying to convince myself, like, it's okay you haven't made much progress on it while I'm stressing over it because I wanted to get it done. And the irony of the whole thing is it's a project based around burnout and I'm trying to prevent burning out on the project, right? So it's this like cycle of crap.
Yeah.
And now that I'm aware of all this stuff because of the heart stuff, because of my changes in jobs and changes within the industry and my work schedule and just basically becoming more of a mature designer over time, like I'm realizing I can now see, if you like astral project above your head, like, hey, Taylor, you're doing that thing you said you weren't going to do, or you're getting really close to that point where, if you do a little bit further, like it's going to be a problem, and that is a new kind of stress that I'm not used to because it used to be just the stress of the thing, right? Or the doing. Now it's the stress of worrying about not doing the thing I didn't want to do, And it's a different kind of stress, but like, and then I'm like, all right, I'm just going to detox. I'll just watch Netflix all night. Like, it'll be cool. Like, I won't worry about it. I won't think. And then like, I look down at the clock. And I'm like, I just stayed up till 2 a.m. watching Netflix and I have work in the morning. Like, what am I doing? There's like that weird thing my brain keeps doing of like Band-Aid one thing, fix another, sometimes let it heal, but then Band-Aid the other thing that I'm really trying to like investigate into my own, like, I'm trying to practice as best as I can what I'm preaching, because I know it works, because when I was doing it, it was working. Right. But it's also so easy to get out of that habit,
Yeah.
and I'm a good case study, like showing like it's a flexible process. It's never going to be the same thing twice.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to learn as a human to just flex and be malleable and understand that like you can hustle, quote unquote, but also you can breathe. And there's a balance in between all of that. And then sometimes you just won't have stuff to do, and that's okay. And there's going to be other times where you're going to have a lot of things to do, and that's also okay, as long as you know that there's another time of like not having that stuff to do coming up, right? And then balancing all of that with social and life and work and blah, 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 you know?
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots there. I think that one of the things that's really resonating for me, what I'm hearing from you, Taylor, is something I love to say, but it's an iterative process. It isn't like, okay, great, you realize that stress is negatively impacting your life. You have this big epiphany moment, everything changes. As things change, different kind of issues or situations or aspect of it come up. And what I'm hearing is that it's more important to kind of cultivate the mindset of keeping on going, understanding that you're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. We're all kind of struggling with this. And it's just important to really keep trying. I'm also hearing, and this is something that I just want to pull out and make really clear because it really stuck out for me, is that for those of us who are those crazy, intense overachievers, and this is a concept now I'm having a little bit of trouble remembering, but I think it's from a book called Never Split the Difference. It could be a book called The One Thing, but anyway, and one of the things that they say is that the concept of balance as a high achiever person, right? Someone who that's intrinsically part of you, is to some degree a fallacy. Like you're never going to have that perfect balance of doing everything, in exactly the right amount of time and never having any stress at all and never having any issues. The thing that I'm hearing from you, which is what we try to cultivate at Anansi as well, is this idea called radical wellness. It's about being vulnerable and honest with yourself that sometimes maybe you're going to overdo it or take on too much, and having a commitment to radically prioritizing your own wellness or health as well, even if it's a little bit later. So that kind of counterbalance idea of letting the pendulum swing back the other way instead of just continuing to go, produce, and then over time work towards, that life that you've designed that feels good and has fewer maybe of those highs and lows, but that it's unrealistic to believe that you're just going to wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden get rid of all your commitments and, live this ultra simple life. Even as someone living a relatively simple life in a rural area, like if your brain's been wired to overachieve for a really long time, it's just not that simple. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and I think you're 100% spot on. I think the backbone of that whole thing is like the awareness portion, right? To know that pendulum's going to swing is one thing, right? But to know also that like it'll eventually settle is also great. And I think that the trap there, though, and I've fallen in it, it sounds like you've fallen in it as well, is that sometimes you start to depend on that pendulum swing, right? They're like, I'll get to that point where everything will be fine. Or I'll get to that point where I'm working a lot. And that's where the danger comes in, right? Is because when you're, number one, banking on that other side of the coin to eventually drop or other shoe to fall, whatever it is, or you're being aware of like, I'm in this period of whatever, but next week it'll be fine, instead of just eventually learning, well, maybe if I don't do this, it won't swing as far next time.
Yeah. That's exactly it. I think you pulled out exactly what I was kind of stumbling my way towards, which is that the point is reducing the intensity of the pendulum swings.
Right.
And you may never achieve it just stopping to swing altogether. But it's a process. It's a process of awareness and intention.
Absolutely.
Now, Taylor, we could keep talking. We literally could keep talking about this for hours. This is a topic I do talk about for almost an hour, probably every day, if you ask my husband. Anyway, but I do want to respect your time here and kind of wind us down. I have a few kind of quicker lightning round questions. You ready for it?
Yeah, I do. I want to hit on one thing and then
for sure.
to jump into that. So there's a slide I close with during the talk, and I bring it up because it's a quote that is a good way to summarize, I think, pretty much all we've talked about tonight. And unfortunately, there's no attribution for it. It's one of those things that are just kind of out there, and it's been said by so many people that no one really knows where it started. But it's been really impactful to the people I've shown it to. So I'd like to continue that train. And it goes, destroy the idea that you have to be constantly working or grinding in order to be successful. embrace the concept that rest, recovery, and reflection are essential parts of the progress towards a successful and ultimately happy life. And I think there's a thing there, right, of like debunking this idea that like grind is the only way to do, right? You should work hard. You should have goals. You should continue moving in your life. But also that rest and reflection is the stuff that makes that stuff worth it.
One last little book there. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Taylor. I think that, man, yeah, it's so simple, but so powerful and definitely not easy. You know, the idea that the rest and the wellness aspect of our life is not just important, it's critical. It's critical for the exact same things that you were trying to overwork yourself to achieve.
Agreed.
Thanks. All right. Anything else? Or are we ready for those lightning round questions?
With those lightning rounds. Let's go.
Awesome. So first one is, I think, directly in line with what we were just talking about. So you've talked about a lot of different things kind of on your journey here, but what's the number one thing that you do to preserve your wellness?
I keep a notebook where I write. So anything that comes to mind, like to-do lists, ideas, whatever it is, I carry a field notes, a little like pocket-sized field notes, just so I can constantly be taking notes, right? Whether it be an idea, something I needed to remember for later. I found that it helps me not worry as much about things that are going on if I can anecdotally kind of log whatever was going on. Like if I'm running out of a meeting and I know there's something I need to do, I'll write it down. Or if I know I got to pick up groceries on the way home, I'll add it as a to-do list, because there's something about writing, right, that allows your brain to realize you've put the thought somewhere else, it's not lost, and then I can come home later and look at that list and be like, oh, that's what I needed to do. Instead of sitting at home going, oh, I knew I had something I needed to pick up on the way back, I forgot, and then stressing over that later. So keep a notebook and using to-do lists and annotations throughout the day.
Yeah. I definitely relate to that. I've kept a journal/notebook for many years. And over Christmas, I turned it into a more official bullet journal style. And I know that's a whole kind of craze and stuff, but just what you're saying, that ability to jot down and kind of take it out of the computer of your brain and put it somewhere else definitely allows me to worry about less things.
Yeah, there's something about pen and paper aside from the phone that makes it a little easier to remember. But
yeah. Okay, so next question. What gets you up in the morning other than coffee?
So I'm gonna try to make this a short answer. I like what I do, and I like the people I do it with, and I like the fact that it has impact on people beyond what I kind of directly perceive. And what I mean by that is like design in general touches so many things. Like you walk outside, like street lights were designed the way they were, stop signs, roads, fences, cars, everything was created by a designer somewhere along the way for a certain purpose, to be able to make your life easier or inform you of something. And there's something nice about that, because if you're talking about like work, like I work at a financial company, right? But we're helping people do smarter things with their money, right? That's like pillar one. My little personal stuff, like it makes people smile and chuckle and whatever. And it also makes me happy to do it. And then I get to give my friends, this new hat or patch or sticker or whatever I made. So knowing that I can wake up and make things and let it exist in the world at some level is the thing that keeps me going.
Awesome. Great answer. And last question, I'm trying out a different lightning round question for the first time today. What is your favorite thing that you do that is not business at all?
I like playing with my dog. I think it's one of those like nice, like anti-anxiety things. And I read this quote that was like animals may be part of your world, but you're their whole world, kind of thing. And that like hit me hard, cause I get home and like, he's just like laying on the couch or wants to play. And whether I'm like done for the day or not, like that's all he wants to do. He was just stoked that I'm home and then we can play and do this thing. And it grounds me a lot of like going, what you're worrying about really doesn't matter. Like he's so obsessed with this stupid bouncy ball that was under the couch and he couldn't get it and was waiting for me to get home to get it. Like that's what was his biggest problem today, like, and it resets kind of whatever mind space I'm in, to just be able to be like, look, like just put yourself in the dog's shoes for a little bit and understand that like, it's just grand to be here and be alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And what a powerful note to end on. Just the simplicity of playing with a puppy. I am a huge dog and just animal lover. And I know most of our listeners are as well. So I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to as a really grounding thing in our lives.
Awesome.
That's really awesome. Well, thank you again, Taylor, for coming, for being vulnerable, for sharing your story, for sharing your journey. I know that I got a lot out of this interview and related to a lot of this in this interview, even just feeling, like less alone. It was not that, but we all get into that mind space. Yeah, this is really great. Thank you.
No worries. This was awesome. I love talking about this stuff, and I learn something new about myself every time I talk about it. So this was great.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, to all of our listeners, as usual, we will reference a lot of this stuff. We'll try to get all of it into the show notes. So books, talks, anything we can, we will have it here for you to reference. Just find it on our website, www.anansicontent.com. That's A-N as in, Nancy, ANSICONTENT.com. And if this resonated for you, man, we would love to hear about it. Email, comment, whatever your preferred medium of listening is. I'd love to hear your story. Is this something that you struggle with? Are you, in a place where you're struggling to get out of the stress zone? Are you maybe just kind of realizing that you're in it? Have you been in a path of kind of detoxing from stress for a while and you're struggling? Particularly that last one, I want to hear from you. We should talk. Anyway, I hope that you got a lot out of this. I know I'm going to be pondering this for days to come. Once again, Taylor, this was really fantastic. To all of our listeners, have an excellent rest of your day. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.